Hello and welcome to Leveraging Google Cloud for Disaster Recovery. My name is David Davis. I'll be the moderator for today's event. Today's event is sponsored by Shoreline Systems. If you have questions during the webinar, please use the GoToWebinar question box there to ask your question. We want this to be an educational event. We encourage your questions. We've got a lot of experts here on the event today to answer your questions about Google Cloud, about disaster recovery, about how to get from your existing data center, to the cloud. So ask away. We encourage those questions. Now, during the webinar, there'll be a few points where we might ask you a couple of poll questions, and of course, we appreciate you answering those questions to help us out to find out where you are, in your journey to using the cloud or leveraging the cloud for disaster recovery. Now, one lucky attendee on the event today will be winning a $300 Visa gift card. We'll be doing that drawing at the end of the event, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Plus, every attendee on this live event will be given a link where they can receive a credit for Shoreline Systems as well as a credit for the Google Cloud Platform. So, of course, stay tuned for that. In some ways, I guess everybody's a winner on this event. So we've got a lot to cover today. Let's go ahead and get started. On today's event, we have as I said, a number of expert presenters. First off, my name is David Davis. As I said, I'll be moderating today's event. I'm the co-founder of Actual Tech Media, who produced today's event. I'm also an 8-time VMware vExpert, an author of numerous video training courses around virtualization and cloud, and a CCIE. And I'm excited to be the moderator, as you can tell, hopefully. So our first presenter on the event today is Mr. Jeff Burns. He's a senior analyst and consultant at the Tenasia Group. Jeff, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe your presentation, what you're going to be covering?
Sure, David. So my past experience, just by way of background, is primarily in infrastructure software. Spent some time at VMware, and today cover all flavors of virtualization in the cloud and their intersection with storage. And today I'd like to just give a brief industry context to the discussion, including some of my perspectives on DR.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks for joining us, Jeff. Our second presenter on the event today is Mr. Dave Elliott. He's the product lead for storage at Google. Dave, what's your background and what are you going to be talking about today?
Sure. So I'm a storage guy. Spent many years at companies like Sun Microsystems, Symantec Veritas, iOmega. I have been in the public cloud group here at Google for about 4 years, and I will be talking about our Google's public cloud and how it is a good infrastructure for you to do DR to the cloud with.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Dave. And then finally, our last presenter on the event today is Mr. George Simons. He's the Chief Operating Officer at Shoreline Systems. He's going to bring everything home, put all these pieces together for us. George, tell us about yourself and your topic.
Oh, thank you, David. So I've been around the storage and, in particular, data protection space for, we'll call it 20 years. I'd actually started my career at Sun, like Dave there, was at Legato when he was at Veritas, but since then, EMC and a number of other storage companies delivering both software and appliances. And I'm going to talk about the DR software and how that really drives to the cloud and why that's a great first step for companies looking to start using the cloud.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks, George. Thanks for joining us. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the event today. So Mr. Jeff Burns is going to be our first presenter. Let me transfer control over to Jeff.
Great, I think we're ready to go. So hi everybody, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you today on the topic of DR. Just a little background on Tenasia Group for those of you who aren't familiar. We're a boutique firm of analysts. We focus on storage, data protection, business continuity, and a whole host of other technologies. So today I'd like to cover 4 different areas, again setting the context for the discussion that follows. I'm going to start with a few of my own perspectives on DR today. And then next, we'll compare and assess 2 major categories of existing DR approaches to kind of see, the state of where we're at right now, both the good things and the not so good things. Then I'll go ahead and very briefly summarize the top issues I see at an industry level, and we'll conclude by exploring a set of key capabilities just in the way of brainstorming that I think will help simplify and improve next-gen DR solutions. So let's start with some of my perspectives on DR, and these are largely based on our ongoing research at Teneza Group and lots of end-user conversations. So as all of you know, since you're here today, DR is a very dynamic solution space, and the technologies and capabilities have really come a long way over the past 10 to 15 years. For those of you who are old enough to remember, we've moved well beyond the off-siting or vaulting of tapes, which I believe was the dominant DR approach through the end of the last century. And so as a result, many shapes and sizes of solutions are available to fit your specific protection requirements and budgets, and we'll talk about some of those today. Now, a really big point I want to make is that a well thought out plan is really key to protecting your key data and workloads. But unfortunately, the planning stages are often overlooked or under prioritized. And this is especially true among the smaller organizations that we speak with. I really think it's human nature. We as human beings don't like to think about failures. We don't like to imagine a prolonged outage. We don't like to think about its consequences. And so it really becomes easier to just ignore the issue. And when you think about the term DR, it's got disaster embedded in it. But in truth, much less than a real cataclysm or disaster can take down your operations. Just things like untimely system failures or software failures or even operator error can cause downtime and actually have been known to take down major websites. So that's just something to keep in mind. So it's really key here in focusing on planning. It's key not to be complacent. I think a basic plan is better than no plan, and your organization can just keep improving on it over time. So the full scope of what's required to do DR successfully, in my experience, is really often oversimplified, often by the vendor community, the solution and service providers. Their pitch, when they want to get your attention, they tend to say things like, if you invest in my solution or service, everything will be okay, we'll take care of it. But in reality, again, just seeing what's out there today, protecting your critical multi-tiered applications, which probably have a lot of interdependencies among them, can be both complex and time intensive. And the bottom line is that doing DR right takes a much bigger effort than vendors would lead you to believe in many cases. So I think it's just good to keep a really critical eye as you evaluate new solutions. So DR to me is a living, ongoing process, but unfortunately, a lot of the companies that we talk to don't tend to view it that way. A lot of folks see it as maybe a once and done type of initiative, one of those things you can just get done, forget about. But it's really important that you regularly review and update your DR plans. And this is especially true as you're making changes to your IT environment or add new applications. And a big point here is that frequent testing is also critical. It's an area that, again, many organizations tend to either overlook or ignore. So when you take all of these factors into account, it's really not that surprising that DR initiatives often fail to meet their objectives. And in those cases, at the end of the day, the application owners don't get what they pay for, and in the event of an outage, they certainly don't get the quality or speed of recovery that they're looking for. So I'd like to pause here just briefly and hear from all of you. Just take a very quick poll. We're asking a simple question here. And the question is, does your organization have an up-to-date DR plan today that you test on a regular basis to ensure that it can be successfully executed in the event of an outage? If you could just please answer that yes or no.
Okay, Jeff, it looks like the majority of the audience has voted. Let me go ahead and share the results with you. And so as you can see, 63% said yes, they do have a plan, and 37% said no. What do you think, Jeff?
I think actually that's very impressive. David. I was actually expecting a much lower percentage than that. Just based on our informal tracking, a little over half of the small and mid-sized companies we talked to actually answered no to that question. I think large organizations do tend to have a plan. So that's great to hear. We've got, almost 2/3 of you that do have a plan. Fantastic. So I have another question then for you that maybe kind of depends a little bit on the question that we just asked. And that question is, are you comfortable that your organization is sufficiently prepared to recover from a prolonged outage? And that includes meeting the RTO and RPO objectives. So if you could just answer that quickly.
Yeah, so the question's there on the screen. So a little reworded, but it says, do you feel your organization is prepared for a prolonged outage and could meet RPO and RTO for critical data and workloads? So the first question was, do you have a plan and is it up to date? And now this question is, could you survive a prolonged outage and actually meet the recovery point objective and the recovery time objectives to get those critical workloads up and running fast? And it looks like most of the audience has voted. Let me go ahead and share those results. So 45% said yes, and 55% said no. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, that's not too bad. Certainly see a lot weaker than that out there, but it does show that the majority of us are still, working towards that confidence level that we can meet those objectives. And until you've been through the process, until you test it regularly enough, it's really hard to know. So, and I guess that's really why we're all here today, is to get better. So thank you folks for that. So let's move on. I'd like to just to briefly look at a couple of categories of approaches. I've kind of grouped a lot of things into these in the interest of time here, but wanted to just examine these briefly so we can kind of see what's working and what's not working out there today. So the first category I put together here is I'm calling local or site-to-site replication. In reality, this includes everything from soup to nuts in the way of traditional array-based replication of data, sometimes adding VMs into that. And then at the very high end of the spectrum, full bidirectional clusters, whether metro or stretch clusters, that basically offer you the opportunity for continuous or near continuous protection. I doubt that too many of you are using those today. They tend to be very expensive and reserved for the most, transaction-intensive and valuable workloads. But in any case, I'm including them here just so we can have the conversation. These approaches enable you to protect workloads and data much more efficiently than through tape vaulting, clearly. And they also allow you to basically dial up or down the level of protection. You can always move to a different type of replication. You can do it on a per app basis if you choose, but it is a bit of work. And one of the big downsides that we see regularly here with these types of approaches is that in almost all cases, you do need compatible infrastructure at both the source and target locations. That's a big one. That prevents a lot of companies from really getting started in DR as we see, and also larger companies prevents them from expanding the number of workloads that they're actually protecting. The other big point I want to emphasize here on the right-hand column is that a second site facility can carry significant cost. Okay, so I have one more polling question. I want to hear from all of you again, and you can see the question here. Basically, it is, are you using a cloud-enabled DR solution or service to protect at least some of your information assets today?
The votes are steadily coming in here. I want to give everyone a chance to answer. All right, looks like the majority have voted. Thank you for that. Let me go ahead and share the results. And so 38% said yes, they have a cloud-enabled DR solution to protect at least some of their assets, their infrastructure or data. 62% said no. What do you think, Jeff?
So that pretty closely jives with our prior experience. What I will say is that if we asked this question maybe 18 months ago, I'm guessing that percentage that said yes would probably be about half that. We've seen a tremendous growth in the adoption of cloud for DR as well as other use cases. But that still says, of course, that over 60% of you aren't looking at using the cloud or aren't actively using the cloud for DR today, which is very insightful, and maybe we can talk about some of the reasons for that in the Q&A section later. So what do cloud-based DR approaches really bring to the table? Well, so what I'm talking about here are DR as a service solutions primarily. You can do it yourself, but there are a good number of DR as a service solutions out there. And in all cases, a public or private cloud is the replication target. So the positives here, again, you can protect your workloads and data offsite. You get much better scalability at the target site than with most traditional array-based site-to-site approaches. And you also get more automation. So those are all good things. You could eliminate the CapEx costs of a second physical site and instead pay monthly. So again, very positive. But on the flip side, you'll still in most cases need that level of compatibility that I talked about between your on-prem and cloud infrastructure. And again, that's a big hurdle. And with the cloud, and this may be a reason that some of you haven't turned to the cloud yet for DR, you also have to pay a lot more attention to data security. One other point to make, down there, the next to last point on the right-hand column, DR as a service solutions don't tend to support all the workloads that you might want to protect. And so, you've got to pay attention to what is supported. And that service will be subject to the SLA limitations of your provider. So clearly, DR technologies and practices have come a long way, even just in the past 5 years. And I just wanted to recap here. We're not going to go through these, but I wanted to recap here for your reference later some of the major issues that I see. They revolve around shortcomings in all phases of DR, planning, testing, and execution. Now, customers that we talk to tend also to be looking for simpler solutions that fit more readily within their existing workflows. And I think this is a great thing. I mean, if we can make DR less intimidating and more of an everyday part of life in the data center, I think a lot more organizations would tend to adopt it. So just one last slide here, and then we'll move to our next presenter. I just put together a really quick wish list of next-gen DR capabilities. I'm going to go through a few of those here, just to kind of give us a baseline for the rest of the day. So first item on the list, wouldn't it be nice if we could all have reliable and fully automated DR to the cloud with the ability to tune it based on policies? This would help to eliminate much of the error that we see in a lot of the manually based processes today. Next, I'd like to see protection extended to all types of workloads, whether they run on bare metal, in virtual servers, in containers, or native to the cloud. Then we'd like to also reduce or eliminate the need for compatible infrastructure, what we talked about here several times. This is a huge stumbling block. Some industries and workloads also require dedicated infrastructure in the cloud for various reasons, and I think it would be helpful to have that option even if it costs a little bit more. A choice of multiple clouds, this is an obvious one, give you greater choice and reduce the potential for lock-in. Another no-brainer, bandwidth-friendly replication. Apply technologies like compression and dedupe to that data stream, make it more efficient, more cost-effective over the wire. And of course, crash consistency doesn't cut it in the recovery of most business-critical workloads. So I think solutions must have app awareness built in, both to the data capture and replication process. And we don't tend to see this a whole lot today, especially with cloud solutions. And finally, just a brainstorming point here, which we'll talk about more. When you think about sending off your data offsite or to the cloud, wouldn't it be cool if your cloud-based service could also address other lifecycle needs for your data and applications? Things like use cases like active archiving or data analytics, without compromising your DR commitments. So these types of capabilities, I think, are all in our best interest. It's not a complete list, but it's kind of the things that stood out for me. And I'm really looking forward to seeing solutions that start to deliver on these in the cloud in the next year. Okay, that's it for me. I'd like to now pass the mic over to our next speaker, Dave Elliott of Google.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that. Great transition as you talked about sort of the future of DR and some of the things that customers will be looking for over the next few years. I think I'm going to leave a large portion of that to George to chat about in a few minutes. But what I wanted to do is take a little bit of a step back and talk about infrastructure. And in my experience, most people have some sort of DR plans, even if it's something as simple as sneaker netting your data off-site. Really, the question is, why do you do the way you do it today, and what workloads can you move to the cloud, or what workloads can you move and make a part of your DR system in the future? So let's jump in and talk a little bit about Google's role in this. So let me start with the very biggest picture here. The very biggest picture is our mission, Google's mission, is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Now, why I start with that typically when I talk about storage is because we have such an ambitious goal, we end up having a very significant set of requirements around storage. So we now have 7 products that have over 1 billion users. And as a result of having 7 products with over 1 billion users, we've had to do some really creative, innovative things that in order to manage and mitigate both the storage and the networking and the compute with such large scale. So some examples of that are, when you think about capital investment, we've invested $27 billion over the last 3 years in our data centers. $27 billion. And I only throw that out there to say, when you talk about DR and DR infrastructure, the basic question is, when you're thinking about moving to the cloud, is, do you want to be in the infrastructure business? Is that a business that differentiates? Is that a process that differentiates your business with your customers and in the marketplace? It is a differentiator for us. It's core to what we do as we deliver those 7 services to 1 billion people, and we've invested appropriately. Another example of that is when you look at our data centers and our network. So we have laid cables across, 4 cables across the oceans of the world. And we've laid we've built an extraordinary networking infrastructure and computing infrastructure. And what that really means is, because we're servicing our 1 billion+ users across those 7 different services, we have built and maintained an extraordinary network and extraordinary servers in our data centers. And so, what do you really need when you think about the infrastructure for cloud DR? You need, obviously, storage there in the middle. You also need compute as you fail over to the cloud, and you need some type of networking. And really, it depends on what type of DR you're aspiring to deliver, whether it's live replication or it's something that is perhaps a little more tolerant to delays in recovery. And those will help dictate which of these are more important. But across all 3 of these, there's a fairly significant set of differentiators for Google. And I'm only talking for a few minutes, so let me just quickly talk about things I think that you'll care about. First is compute. On the compute side of the house, you can save a significant amount of money as you move to Google's cloud. We've gotten extraordinarily good at driving down cost and increasing automation within our data centers. Plus, how we sell, how we price things tends to be different than most other vendors. If you look at this compared to some of the other major cloud vendors, we offer things like custom machine types. So again, on the compute side of the house, you can pick the exact type of machine you need, not be pushed into a pre-configured type of machine. We also offer per minute billing instead of per hour billing. So you only actually pay for the compute time that you actually use. We also have this really neat feature that delivers automated discounts, so that if you use more, Instead of having to pre-negotiate lower prices, our system just automatically recognizes that you use more and automatically gives you the discount, when you reach those thresholds. And just generally speaking, we also have lower base prices. So you can save a lot from a compute perspective as you move to cloud for your DR needs. I did want to briefly touch on the storage piece of it because I think you can save a lot and have a much better experience really in simplifying your organization, simplifying your processes by moving to the cloud. This is our cloud storage infrastructure, moving from left to right, storage and databases, big data and analytics, and machine learning. Now, not all of these things are relevant to DR, but I did want to talk about cloud storage. This is our object store, this is our blob store, and it allows you to store, access, and manage your unstructured data on our infrastructure. So these are the types of things that you would move, files and images and things like that, to our cloud, and it's the same infrastructure that I talked about at the top of my session here that runs these 7 services with 1 billion users. Gives you unlimited scale, global availability using our networking, high durability, 11.9 durability built in, and of course at low cost. What are some of the key differentiators as you move to the cloud? It has to be scalable, it has to be available, it has to be durable, and of course cost effective. Now this is true, I think, for any cloud, right? As you move your DR to the cloud, these things are things that just simply come built in should be any cloud service, any cloud storage service. How Google differentiates itself with our storage are around these 6 areas. Our network, I talked a little bit about that. Our cost leadership, I briefly talked on that. I've got another single slide on that. Our seamless integration across our storage services, across our storage tiers. Our value-added services, things like machine learning layered on top of the storage that's put in our cloud. Security and trust is incredibly important to us. We have more than 600 people who are focused on protecting our network. And then finally, the technical support is an area that most people are surprised to learn we've done some incredible innovations on. So the actual products that in storage that work with Shoreline, that work in delivering DR as a service, this is our object storage, our blob store. And moving left to right, we've got 4 distinct tiers. Multi-regional is a tier that gives you exactly what it describes, multiple regions built in. Regional is designed specifically for high performance. You put your compute next to your storage. Nearline is for cooling data, and then Coldline really is the fantastic fit for DR. This is the very low cost archival and DR tier. So it is 7/10 of a penny per gig per month to store your data there. And here's the key. It's millisecond response time. There's no delay on the time it takes to read the data out of Coldline. So you get Glacier or tape-like cost, but you get instant access to it. Now you do pay more to access that, so it's not intended for web serving or computational processing or anything like that. It's really intended for, again, archiving or disaster recovery, because you do pay more for it. But the great part about this is it is accessible when you need it, when you have to do a recovery. So Coldline is the service that we launched about a month and a half ago, and Shoreline was one of our launch partners. I finally wanted to close with saving money with cloud, and this is a little bit of motherhood and apple pie, but I really think it's something that's important and relevant to this conversation about where you do your DR and why the cloud fits and how the cloud fits. Compared to the traditional cost of outlaying capital and hardware, paying people and taking on all kinds of risks because you're doing it yourself, cloud, pay for what you use, you don't have commitments, and you allow us to be the experts in managing and mitigating your infrastructure. And Google Cloud in particular, we already, for storage, already have the lowest prices, between 13 and 26% cheaper than other cloud vendors. We have extreme economies of scale based upon, again, those 7 services with 1 billion users, and incredible automation. And we are driving down the cost, continue to drive down the cost, and will continue to drive down the cost of storage, compute, and networking. So with that, I'd like to hand the session over to George to talk about how Google Cloud Platform works with Shoreline Systems, really the sort of the brains on doing the backup or doing the DR to our cloud. George?
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Shoreline Systems and then talk about DR and how we address some of those issues that Jeff brought up earlier and how we work with the Google Cloud as a DR target. But sort of taking it to a high level to start with, I think we're going through an enormous transformation within IT, and in the long run, I think IT will no longer manage infrastructure for applications, but it will manage the policies to put the applications on the optimal infrastructure, which could be on premises, it could be in a cloud, it could be a hybrid. All of this is really going to drive the need for application mobility, and that's where Shoreline sees our value add in the long term, the ability to move the workload, the application and its working environment to the right target, whether that is a private cloud, maybe a new infrastructure, or a hybrid cloud, or the public cloud. So we deliver both migration services and disaster recovery for those workloads. And long term, that'll all get combined with analysis and availability management, sort of into the newest buzzword of orchestration. But for now, really looking at today, we provide that application mobility from any virtual environment or physical, and I think that's one of the real critical ones. Jeff brought up, bare metal systems, physical systems, containerized applications, right? All of that needs to move, and it needs to be in an automated way. And then some of the other value add we provide is scalability. It's not managing to move or have DR for a few systems. You might have 1,000 virtual machines in your infrastructure. So you need an automated and scalable solution for that. And as we start looking at the cloud, risk reduction becomes a critical issue. And so we look at how you also minimize that risk in the process. Our product line, we have the migration product that I talked about, SureEdge DR, which is our focus here today, local backup recovery, disaster recovery, the cloud DR, which is really what we're talking about, DR as a service. And we also have a product called Sunshine, which is how you can seed very large amounts of data to get started. So that's an appliance that can move the data through. What we are doing is trying to give you that fastest time to production. So we have a lot of advantages in here. One of them, and you heard it earlier, is that we dedupe, we compress, and from a security point of view, we also encrypt the data between the two locations. We do bidirectional replication so that, if I need to come back, I can come back, I can get up and running quickly. If I have things running at both sites, I can use them back and forth. We only create a single connection between your on-premises and your cloud. We have very little operational disruption. You don't install agents on every one of your systems. So that makes it easier to manage, easier to upgrade, and with the automation, it makes it a very scalable solution. One of the keys here is by having this agentless environment, we take snapshots of data from any of the servers, physical or virtual, that you're going to protect. We put those into a pool, which is where we do the deduplication across all of your systems. They're in the compression encryption and moving that to the target site. Once on the target site, it can get rehydrated into a new virtual machine. So the next important thing, and I saw it again on Jeff's slide, which was compatible infrastructure. We take that off of your hands. You don't have to worry about, am I running VMware? Am I running Hyper-V? Am I running a native Windows OS? We do the transformations necessary for that to run in the Google Cloud environment. So that all happens in our migration rehydration process. The snapshots we take are application aware. So you do have application consistency when you come up. Again, an important part in a recovery, the last thing you want is rollbacks going on, trying to find what is the consistent set of data. How do I get up and running? By taking the snapshots, we can give you data consistency at the application level when you bring the virtual machine up. We also deal with complex applications because today many applications are not made up of a single virtual machine, but they're made up of multiple machines creating a single application. So the ability to have a consistent view across all those systems for that single application and to bring them up in the right order so that they work is all part of making this a manageable process and a much more automated process. Finally, testing is critical. So the ability to test in the cloud, bring it up when I want to. This is where paying, only as you need it. I can bring up the virtual machines, I can test them, I bring them back down. So we have the ability to test, none of this impacting your production operation, which is really a key issue in this entire process. The other point which Dave was talking about, which is the different tiers of storage that are offered by Google Cloud. Tie those tiers of storage into your disaster recovery planning, and then you can look at what are the recovery time objectives I have? How quickly do I need to be up and running? And based on that, based on how often I want to test, based on how often I think I might need to use it, I can choose a tier of storage that matches the cost that I need with the number of times I need that in particular environment to come up and be running. So I tie those two together. I then have three options for DR with the Sureline product. We have instant recovery. So these are pre-built boot images. Every time an incremental is sent to the cloud, the image is updated, it's ready to boot, and therefore in a disaster, it's simply booting the virtual machine and I'm up and running. That has the shortest recovery time objective. You do pay more in the process because you're regularly updating that virtual machine. The next is an on-demand copy. So in this case, our client is continually updating the data store in the cloud with the latest information. So the data is kept in the dedupe storage until it's needed. Therefore, I'm not having virtual machines running on a regular basis for my applications. Clearly, I do when I want to test, but other than that, I'm using very little CPU. There is a longer recovery time objective for that because I have to rehydrate that data into the virtual machine to be up and running. We also have what we call a storage direct replication. So this uses absolutely no CPU in the cloud, in that the data is really just kept in a Google object store. Now, when I need to do recovery, it adds another step because I need to create that data store and then I do the full rehydration. So it's a slower process, but it's the lowest cost. It's great for using the cold line storage, for example, just keeping that object store. But that cold line storage has the performance necessary when I need to rehydrate, bring that up, and get it running. So it really gives you the opportunity to do your disaster recovery planning, as we were talking about earlier. Decide what are my objectives, how quickly do I need to be up and running, what are the costs that I'm looking at to manage, and then choose appropriate disaster recovery for all of those variables. We support a wide variety of specific applications as well as being able to support any in general application. From a physical, we work with the Windows servers, with Linux servers, the whole range of hypervisors. And really our tightest relationship is with Google from the cloud, but we do have multiple clouds supported, and we have the ability to do DR from cloud to cloud, which some customers have been interested in. So it's an interesting combination and does need to hit all of those different variables. Trying to wrap this up, it is important to be agnostic. So Sureline runs, as I said before, on physical servers, on virtual servers with containers across the different clouds that are out there. We retain the point-in-time copies. So you can recover locally from the point-in-time snapshots that we've taken. You can recover in the cloud from the point-in-time snapshots that we've taken. The deduplication works across your entire data set, so this is important for managing the network bandwidth. We're only sending deltas across, not only deltas from the changes from the previous snapshot on a particular server, but deltas from the dedupe information that's already been sent to the cloud. So we're very bandwidth friendly, as well as being security friendly, making sure that everything is encrypted, and add compression to that, and it really is the most efficient way to migrate data to a cloud. We do give an enterprise management console, so you can see not only just a single site, but you can see multiple sites that you're managing and doing DR to the cloud. The agentless install is important, not just to get up and running, but as I mentioned, in order to be able to manage updates. I don't have to do updates to every single server. Makes it easy to deploy. Simple GUI makes it easy to manage. But also, again, looking at this plan, automate, test cycle that our tool lets you walk through. Testing is a critical component to the disaster recovery. And the combination of being able to test in the cloud when I need it, only pay for those tests when I'm doing them, and then looking at the overall process of not having to replicate the environment. That to me is one of the most critical ones. Jeff's comment about some of the compatibility in the infrastructure that's needed. If you think about having to duplicate everything that you have in your data center to run in an environment in another data center, there's a tremendous amount of hardware expense in that. Managing all of that hardware, there's a tremendous expense. And keeping it up to date as you make changes in the primary data center. DR to the cloud eliminates all of that, which is really, to me, why when you look at my first step into the cloud, DR makes so much sense. And then the rest of the automation, which allows us to do the transformation. If I'm coming from Hyper-V on one server and VMware on another server and targeting the Google Cloud, we insert the right drivers. We do automated transformations for that target environment. There may also be additional changes you want to make. For example, you can set the number of virtual cores that I want. That can be part of my plan for DR. Any IP changes that need to be made is part of the DR plan. This is what allows, in a disaster recovery situation or during your test, for the virtual machine to come up and be running without a lot of manual intervention needed by the admin. So automation is a critical piece for this, transformations, and even additional pre and post processing, because you may want to turn off virus checking that you have locally that doesn't make sense in the cloud, or I might want to insert new licenses in the cloud that I need in that environment. All of that can be automated in this process so that you are up and running quickly and able to move forward. So with that, Jeff said that some vendors say if you invest in our solution, everything will be okay. So I guess I need to say that. Everything will be okay. But with that, let me turn it back over to Dave and take us to the next session.
Excellent, excellent presentation. Thanks so much, George. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. And at this point, I'd like to announce the winner of the $300 Visa gift card is Edith Holbert from California. Congratulations, Edith. We'll reach out to you via email. But don't everyone leave the webinar at once. We do have some more cool things here to talk about. We have a big Q&A session coming up. So with that, I'd like to prompt you to go ahead and use the Q&A box there to enter your questions. We have a lot of experts here to answer them. And while we do that, I'm going to go ahead and leave this slide up here. This is information where you can go and get that limited time credit for Google Cloud and credit for Shoreline Systems. So go ahead and check that out. There's the email address there, the info email address, as well as a phone number. So let me go ahead and ask our first question, and I'll direct that to George from Shoreline. And this person here is asking about, what is it that's stopping companies that you talk to? What are the inhibitors, I guess is what they're saying, for people to move to cloud disaster recovery? George?
It's a great question. Part of it is really aligning their entire organization around what to do about DR. DR is something that goes all the way to the boardroom quite often, and so there's the internal getting the organization on one page as far as what the requirements are for disaster recovery. So I think a lot of it is that first planning point part of it. And then when you say, okay, now where am I going to? In many cases, as I said, this is the first step using a public cloud for an organization. So they go through the security questions and is this the right thing to do? And I think that's a great time for me to sort of hand it to Dave and talk about, what does Google hear as far as when customers look, is the cloud safe for us?
Yeah, well, my take on that is, DR is at the highest level, DR to the cloud makes sense to people, right? Whenever you talk to somebody, and you think, well, why can't I just leverage somebody else's infrastructure instead of having to build a secondary server or data center in a separate location? Just leverage somebody else's because I'm never really going to use it. So it makes sense at the sort of highest level, but where, as I say, the devil's in the details. And as we all know, DR is messy, as Jeff pointed out, as George pointed out. There are lots of contingencies. There's lots of complicated operating systems and applications, and you have to make sure they're all protected the right way and restarted in the right way. So it's just messy business. And so from my perspective, what slowed things down has been just honestly not enough alignment, tight alignment like what we have today with Shoreline Systems, right? The front end, the brains of managing and mitigating the moves to the cloud, and then the cloud infrastructure players themselves just haven't really been haven't been that compelling. And that's what I see. Security, yes, it's a question we get asked about on a regular basis, but a lot less today than 3 or 4 years ago. Google is extraordinarily secure, as I mentioned in my session. We've got more than 600 engineers whose job it is to focus on protecting our infrastructure, and you get the benefit of their work as you move your data and your workloads to our cloud.
Good information, Dave and George. Thank you. Another question here is, what are the steps? Like, how do you get started? George, you want to start with that?
Sure. So you have to decide what you want to protect from a disaster recovery point of view, and you also have to decide in what order you want to bring things up. So not all applications are created equal. And, to get a business up and running, there are important applications and there are nice to have applications. So number one, you have to figure out what is important, what's critical to your business. Once you figure that out, then it's the question of, what are my recovery time objectives? How quickly do I need to be up and running in case of a disaster? And from there, it becomes a planning process of, okay, for this particular machine, physical, virtual, whatever, how is that going to look in the cloud? That's where I was talking about, what happens to IP? Am I just using, dynamic, or do I have static IPs that I need to take care of? How much processing do I want in that? Are there other changes that I'm going to need when it's running in the cloud? So it's that sort of planning process that I need to put together. And in general, from there, it's try a few, right? It's a testing process to see how this works, how I set it up. But from there, it really becomes an automation process in that I need to be able to define the machines, define the order of machines that I want to bring up, and start to build a plan around that. What we do is we provide a GUI for you to build that plan in, but that planning is critical at that point.
Great answer. Great answer. Another question here from the audience, and Jeff, maybe this is a good question for you actually, is how does doing DR in the cloud versus the traditional method, how does it change the life of the typical data center admin or manager How does the cloud for DR make life easier?
That is a great question. I think in general, it takes the kind of day-to-day, a lot of the day-to-day sort of administrative, process focus away, assuming that that's being offloaded to DR as a service provider. But I think it really causes IT managers, administrators that are responsible for DR to kind of think about maybe a little bit the bigger picture, what George and Dave have mentioned in terms of, what workloads and data are most critical to protect. How do I protect those? How do I ensure that I am satisfying my application owners' both availability and recovery needs? And those are really critical. So the administrator or the manager become more, I guess, the customer, in this case, and get to, ask the tough questions of the DR as a service provider. That's not to say they don't still have responsibility, because they do in most cases. But I think by taking that step back, in many cases, the managers and administrators really can see the bigger picture. We've seen that in talking to several customers, moving from a traditional site to site where they're actually managing and hands-on every day to going to the cloud. So I think it's a good thing in general. As George and Dave have both mentioned, planning is really critical and ongoing testing is really critical. Just because you've kind of offloaded some of that responsibility to a DR as a service provider doesn't mean that you should stop worrying about testing. It's just a critical part of the whole process to ensure reliability. So those are my thoughts there.
Great point. Great point. Thanks, Jeff. Another question here from the audience is, this person is saying cost is no longer the key differentiator to move towards different cloud providers, but availability and customer service are. George, what's your take on that statement?
So I think it's a great point. I have to say cost is always some issue, but reliability is a critical one. Dave and I were actually just talking about that yesterday in terms of the infrastructure they provide, because when you have your own data center, you are responsible for it. When you are in a public cloud, you're relying on somebody else. So I think I'll let Dave sort of finish that answer, because it is so important.
Dave, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think first off, couldn't agree with you more, George. Cost is always a driver. It may be less of a driver today than it has been in the past, but especially when you're talking about just generally IT infrastructure and especially storage, cost is always a significant driver. Customer service and availability also agree. I would also layer in the question earlier about security. For our portfolio of storage tiers I showed earlier, we have 3 levels of availability SLA. So we've got a written SLA. It ranges from 99% available up through 99.95% available. And we have 11.9's durability engineered into our offering. So depending on how important availability is to you, the requirement that the first time that you go and seek out that piece of information, that it's instantly available, you can go from 99% of the time up to 99.95%, pay a little bit more for the higher availability. And then customer service, also agree with you, especially as we move to work as larger and larger enterprises move portions of their business to the cloud. Google announced back last month something called a Customer Reliability Engineer, CRE, which is a notion that we have some shared risk with our customers. We have named people who work sort of hand in glove with customers to ensure that that our infrastructure is working as they expect. So agree with that, with the availability and the customer service comment earlier, but also layer on top of that cost and would layer on top of that security.
Awesome, awesome. Another question here from the audience is, where do people kind of get started in cloud with DR? I mean, like, what's the initiator for that? I mean, for the people who don't have a DR plan at all, it may just be, hey, we don't have a plan, we need to do something, you know, let's look at cloud. But in other cases, you know, things change. I know in companies, you know, maybe they grow, or they have aging technology, or, you know, whatever it is. George, where are you seeing companies, you know, kind of get started when it comes to moving into the cloud for DR?
So one of the drivers I'm seeing today are sort of infrastructure refreshes. There's a lot of that starting to happen as you look at new on-premises infrastructures, whether it's hyper-converged systems, converged systems, you know, et cetera. As they look to make those changes in the infrastructure, now there's the question of, what do I do with DR? Do I try to take my old equipment and move it to a secondary site? Unfortunately, that old equipment is generally out of, you know, warranty, and back to the cost, and, you know, what does it do to an IT person's day-to-day? That tends to be a big driver when that infrastructure change happens. It's now, do I want to replicate that infrastructure that I'm, you know, deploying, or do I want to look at the cloud as the way to do DR for it? So I think that's probably the biggest driver that I see right now. And at that point, you know, now it's, what am I coming from and what am I going to? You know, am I still on VMware? Am I on Hyper-V? Am I on KVM? You know, if you look at hyperconverged, Nutanix has AHV, their own hypervisor, and what can I target and how? And that's generally what drives people towards products like ours, and honestly other third-party DR solutions. And you know, now you look for the combination of the DR solution and the cloud, and you do need to look at them hand in hand. As Dave was saying, you know, we very tightly tie into Google Cloud, and we think we can offer a lot of advantages, and you can, you know, use us sort of hand in glove there. But, you know, whatever your target is, you want to make sure you have a vendor that ties tightly into your target environment.
Great point. Great point. Thanks, George. We're running low in time here on the event. I think this is a great point to kind of wrap it up. But first, I wanted to see if, George, if you could kind of summarize for the audience the limited time offering with the credits that are available.
Hey, this is Dave. I can summarize the Google portion of it.
Okay.
It says $200 credit. Did want to emphasize the fact that that's a $200 credit specifically over and above what we typically offer for somebody who is starting with Google's Cloud. So, and that's specific to our promotion with Shoreline. So really, it's $500 because we typically offer $300 to people who are starting. So if you've never used Google's Cloud before, it's $300 plus this additional $200 for a total of $500. And as you look at cloud pricing on storage and compute, it's actually $500 actually gets you pretty far in terms of testing the cloud.
Awesome. Awesome.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, and from a Shoreline point of view, you know, we do proof of concepts, and, you know, we'll work hand in hand so that you can use our DR product to try Google Cloud, and, you know, it's a painless way to find out how it all works together.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, anything further to add, George?
No, I really want to thank Actual Tech for hosting us today. I'd like to thank both Dave Elliott and Jeff Byrne for joining us, and, you know, I think it's been some great information. So just like to thank you all.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Jeff. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, George, and thank you to the audience for taking time out of your busy day to join us on this event today. I hope you'll check out the information there, learn more about using Google Cloud for your disaster recovery, and have a great day.